When dealing with someone who constantly dismisses your feelings, takes advantage of your kindness, and thrives on control, being nice won't protect you. In fact, it often fuels the cycle. Niceness in this situation can be mistaken for weakness. So instead of trying harder to please, here's what to do instead. When people think about boundaries, they often imagine them as walls meant to keep others out or punish someone for doing something wrong. But healthy boundaries aren't about pushing people away or creating hostility. They're really about defining the space where you feel safe and respected. Boundaries function as guidelines that protect your emotional, mental, and sometimes even physical well-being. Without them, you leave yourself vulnerable to repeated harm, especially when dealing with someone who disregards your needs or tries to exploit your kindness. Setting limits is not an act of cruelty. It's an act of self-care. Imagine a fence around your yard. The fence isn't there because you dislike your neighbors or want to punish them. It's there because you need to define what's yours and where others must ask permission before entering. It's not about exclusion, it's about clarity. In relationships, boundaries serve the same purpose. They let people know what you will accept and what you won't. When dealing with someone who repeatedly crosses lines, having clear boundaries ensures you don't lose yourself in their behavior. Boundaries also help you take back control in situations where you may feel powerless. For example, if someone constantly raises their voice during disagreements, you might say, "I'm not willing to continue this conversation if it involves yelling." That statement is not about silencing them. It's about asserting your right to have discussions without verbal aggression. And the key is to follow through. If they continue yelling, you leave the room or end the conversation. Without action, boundaries become empty words, and the person will continue pushing against them. Another reason boundaries matter is because they protect you from burnout. If you are constantly giving in, saying yes when you want to say no, or allowing your time and energy to be consumed by someone else's demands, you will eventually feel drained and resentful. Boundaries help preserve your limited emotional resources. Saying, "I can't talk about this right now," or "I'm not available today," doesn't make you selfish. It makes you aware of your limits, and it communicates those limits in a way that others can respect, if they choose to. It's important to understand that boundaries are about your behavior, not about controlling the other person. You cannot force someone to stop yelling, lying, or manipulating. What you can do is decide how you will respond when those behaviors occur. Boundaries shift the focus away from trying to change someone else, which is often impossible, and back onto what you can control, your own actions. This perspective is empowering because it releases you from the exhausting cycle of trying to fix someone who doesn't want to change. For many people, guilt becomes the biggest obstacle to setting boundaries. They worry that saying no or drawing a line will hurt the other person's feelings or make them seem unkind. But protecting yourself is not the same as being unkind. It's a recognition that your needs are just as important as anyone else's. Boundaries actually make relationships healthier because they create an atmosphere of mutual respect. Without them, resentment builds and communication breaks down. Boundaries are also essential when dealing with individuals who test limits on purpose. These individuals may push against your rules, dismiss your concerns, or try to manipulate you into relaxing your standards. In these situations, consistency becomes crucial. If you bend your boundaries each time pressure is applied, the other person learns that persistence will eventually get them what they want. By standing firm, you teach them that your boundaries are non-negotiable. Even if they don't like it, they will begin to understand that you take your well-being seriously. Ultimately, boundaries act as both a shield and a guide. They shield you from repeated harm, and they guide you toward healthier ways of relating to others. They're not about punishing anyone or cutting people off unnecessarily. They're about honoring yourself and teaching others how to interact with you in a respectful way. When you find yourself in situations where your words are constantly twisted or your perspective is dismissed, it's natural to feel the urge to explain yourself in greater detail. You want to be understood. You hope that if you provide enough information, clarify your reasoning, or restate your position just one more time, the other person will finally see your point. But with someone who has no genuine interest in hearing you, all that explaining becomes fuel for more conflict rather than resolution. Instead of resolving misunderstandings, it creates new openings for manipulation. That's why learning to stop over explaining yourself is such an important skill. The impulse to over-explain often comes from a place of fear, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged harshly, or fear of being rejected. You may believe that if you don't provide enough context, the other person will assume the worst about you. But here's the problem. When someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no amount of words will change their mind. They are not listening to learn or connect. They are listening to find fault, gain control, or wear down your confidence. Every extra sentence you offer becomes material for them to distort or criticize. Consider how exhausting it is to continually justify why you made a certain choice or why you feel the way you do. Each time you explain, you hope the conversation will finally end, yet somehow it drags on longer. What starts as a simple, "I don't agree," turns into a 20-minute lecture defending your reasoning. And the more you defend yourself, the more frustrated you feel when your words are dismissed again. At that point, you're not only drained but also doubting whether you had the right to set a limit in the first place. That's exactly why cutting down explanations is so powerful. Short, clear responses protect you. Saying, "That doesn't work for me," or "I see it differently," communicates your position without handing over unnecessary ammunition. These statements are complete on their own. They don't invite debate. They don't require further defense. They don't give the other person more to twist. It may feel uncomfortable at first to leave your response that short. You may worry that you sound cold or dismissive. But the truth is, brevity is a form of strength. It signals that you are confident in your stance and that you don't need external approval to validate your choices. Another benefit of resisting the urge to explain is that it helps you stay emotionally grounded. Long explanations often come from a reactive place. You feel attacked, so you rush to justify yourself. But once you step back and remind yourself, "I don't need to prove anything here," you shift into a calmer state of mind. You reclaim control of the conversation by refusing to engage on terms that drain you. You may notice that the silence following a short response feels uncomfortable. That silence is actually your ally. It puts the burden back on the other person to react without you feeding them more to use against you. Of course, this doesn't mean you should never explain anything to anyone. In healthy relationships, explanation can foster understanding and connection. When two people respect each other, offering context or sharing your thought process can deepen trust. But the key difference is reciprocity. In a healthy relationship, the other person also explains their perspective, listens to yours, and values clarity. In toxic dynamics, there's no balance. You're the only one explaining, and the other person is only criticizing. That's when you know your words are being wasted. Ultimately, the decision to stop over explaining yourself is about protecting your mental energy. You don't owe lengthy justifications to people who aren't engaging in good faith. A simple, firm response is enough. Each time you resist the urge to elaborate, you reinforce the message that your boundaries don't require defending. They are valid simply because you set them. And that shift from defending to simply stating restores power back to you where it belongs. Detaching emotionally doesn't mean that you stop caring altogether or that you harden yourself into someone who feels nothing. What it really means is creating enough space between your sense of self and another person's behavior so that their actions no longer dictate your inner world. When you're caught in a cycle with someone who provokes, criticizes, or manipulates, it's easy to absorb their negativity as though it defines you. You may find yourself reacting with anger, guilt, or anxiety every time they push a button. Emotional detachment is the process of stepping back and recognizing that their reactions, moods, and opinions belong to them, not to you. One of the hardest parts of dealing with difficult people is resisting the belief that you can change them if you just try harder. You may think that if you respond with enough kindness, patience, or explanation, eventually they will understand and stop mistreating you. But the reality is you cannot control their thoughts or behavior. The more you try, the more trapped you become in the cycle of overgiving and disappointment. Detachment allows you to shift your energy away from trying to manage them and back onto what you can manage, your own responses and your own well-being. Imagine someone constantly throwing darts at a wall. If you're standing right in front of it, those darts hit you every time. Detachment is like stepping aside so the darts no longer land on you. The The darts don't stop coming, but you've positioned yourself so that they no longer pierce your sense of peace. When someone insults you, instead of immediately taking it in as truth, you pause and remind yourself, that's their projection. That's not who I am. This internal reminder breaks the automatic chain of reaction and gives you room to decide how you want to respond, or if you want to respond at all. Practicing emotional detachment also helps you avoid getting pulled into arguments that go nowhere. A person who thrives on conflict wants you emotionally invested because that's how they gain power. If you stay calm and refuse to escalate, they lose that sense of control. Detachment is not about winning or losing the argument. It's about no longer letting their provocations dictate your emotional state. Sometimes that means walking away from a conversation mid-sentence. Sometimes it means offering no reaction at all. Silence can be a powerful form of self-protection when it's used intentionally. Another key aspect of detachment is developing an inner dialogue that counters the negative impact of toxic interactions. Instead of replaying hurtful comments in your head and questioning your worth, you consciously tell yourself, their reaction says more about them than it does about me. This shift in perspective helps you separate your identity from their behavior. It takes practice because if you've been conditioned to absorb blame, it won't feel natural at first. But over time, you strengthen your ability to remain centered regardless of what's happening around you. Detachment also doesn't mean withdrawing from life or relationships altogether. It's not the same as shutting down emotionally. In fact, healthy detachment allows you to engage more authentically with others because you're not tangled up in constant defensiveness or anxiety. You can still feel compassion, empathy, and even love, but those feelings come from a grounded place rather than from a desperate attempt to control or fix someone else. It's the difference between offering kindness freely and offering it out of fear that you'll be rejected if you don't. The practice of detachment is ultimately about freedom. When you stop tying your self-worth to how another person behaves, you reclaim your independence. You realize that you don't need their approval to feel okay. You don't need their validation to know you're enough. Their chaos no longer dictates your peace. That mental and emotional distance allows you to preserve your energy, make clearer decisions, and maintain a stronger sense of self even in the midst of difficult relationships. When you're caught in the orbit of someone who drains you emotionally, it's easy to forget that your well-being matters too. You may become so focused on managing their moods, avoiding conflict, or keeping the peace that you lose sight of your own needs. Over time, this self-neglect chips away at your confidence, your energy, and even your physical health. Prioritizing your well-being is not selfish. It's a necessary act of survival that allows you to protect your identity, maintain your strength, and build a life that feels fulfilling and balanced. One of the first steps in prioritizing yourself is recognizing when you've been consistently putting others ahead of you to your own detriment. Maybe you notice that you rarely say no, even when you're exhausted. Maybe you catch yourself canceling your own plans to meet someone else's demands. Or perhaps you've stopped doing the things that once brought you joy because you're always bracing for the next conflict. These are signs that your life has become centered around someone else's behavior rather than your own growth. Reversing that pattern starts with granting yourself permission to matter again. Taking care of your well-being means deliberately creating space for activities, relationships, and routines that replenish you instead of depleting you. That might look like scheduling time to exercise, getting adequate rest, or pursuing a hobby that stimulates your mind. It could also mean spending more time with friends who uplift you or joining a community where you feel understood and supported. The key is that these choices are not optional luxuries. They are essential practices that remind you that you are more than the stress of dealing with someone else's dysfunction. It also helps to reframe the idea of self-care beyond the surface level things we often associate it with. While taking a spa day or treating yourself can be nice, true self-care goes deeper. It's about consistently making decisions that protect your energy and align with your values. Sometimes that means having uncomfortable conversations where you stand up for yourself. Other times it means letting go of people, places, or commitments that no longer serve your growth. It requires courage because you will sometimes face pushback from those who benefit from your self-neglect. But prioritizing yourself doesn't require anyone else's permission. It only requires your decision. A big part of maintaining your well-being is strengthening your mental and emotional resilience. Practices like journaling, meditation, or therapy can help you reconnect with your inner voice, especially if it's been drowned out by constant criticism or manipulation. These practices give you clarity about what you want for your life and reinforce the belief that you deserve peace and fulfillment. When you're grounded in that belief, it becomes much harder for someone else to convince you that your needs don't matter. Another powerful way to prioritize yourself is to create a future vision that's independent of toxic dynamics. If all of your plans and energy are wrapped up in managing a difficult relationship, it can feel like your life is on hold. Shifting your focus toward your own goals, whether that's advancing your career, improving your health, or exploring a passion project, gives you a sense of purpose beyond the chaos. That forward movement not only builds confidence, but also reduces the power that negativity holds over you. Choosing yourself consistently may stir feelings of guilt at first, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that putting others first is always virtuous. But guilt does not mean you're doing something wrong. It simply means you're breaking old patterns. With time, you'll start to notice the benefits of living in alignment with your own needs: more energy, greater clarity, and an improved ability to handle stress. And as you grow stronger in prioritizing your well-being, you'll also become better at building healthier relationships where mutual respect replaces one-sided sacrifice. Many people are taught from a young age that being nice is the highest virtue. You're told to always be polite, to avoid making waves, and to put the feelings of others first. Niceness becomes a shield you carry, believing it will protect you from conflict and keep relationships stable. But when you're dealing with someone who takes advantage of kindness, niceness doesn't work the way you think it does. Instead of shielding you, it can make you a target. There is a critical difference between kindness, which is rooted in compassion and respect, and niceness, which often comes from fear of rejection or disapproval. When you confuse niceness with strength, you give away your power without realizing it. Niceness in difficult relationships often looks like over-accommodating, staying quiet to avoid conflict, or saying yes when you mean no. It may feel like you're keeping the peace, but in reality, you're suppressing your needs to protect someone else's comfort. Over time, this self-silencing erodes your confidence and reinforces to the other person that your boundaries are negotiable. What you intended as strength, the ability to tolerate and endure, ends up looking like submission, and those who thrive on control are quick to exploit that. True strength does not come from always being agreeable. Strength shows up when you can hold your ground respectfully, even if it risks upsetting someone else. It's the courage to say, "That's not acceptable to me," or "I'm not available for this right now," and then follow through with action. At first, this might feel harsh if you've equated strength with endless patience. But in reality, boundaries and self-assertion are what prevent relationships from becoming unbalanced and unhealthy. Strength means valuing yourself enough to stop giving in just to avoid discomfort. Part of the confusion comes from the social rewards that niceness brings the short term. When you're nice, people may praise you as easygoing, generous, or selfless. You may even feel temporarily safer because conflict is avoided, but the long-term cost is high. You teach others that your feelings are optional, that you can be overlooked, and that you will tolerate being treated poorly. Strength, on the other hand, may not earn you immediate praise, especially from those who benefit from your compliance. But it creates lasting respect, both self-respect and respect from others who recognize that you have clear standards. It's also worth noting that niceness and kindness are not the same thing. Kindness is intentional and genuine. It flows from empathy and a desire to treat others with dignity. You can be kind and still firm. You can be compassionate and still say no. Niceness, in contrast, often masks fear. It's motivated not by genuine care, but by the hope that if you're pleasant enough, you won't be rejected or criticized. Kindness requires strength because it involves being real, even when it's uncomfortable. Niceness avoids truth for the sake of appearing agreeable. That avoidance might make things smoother in the moment, but it weakens you over time. Shifting from niceness to strength requires practice. The first step is noticing when your yes really means, "I don't want to, but I feel like I should." Catching that moment gives you the opportunity to pause and reconsider whether you're acting from genuine choice or from fear of conflict. Over time, each small act of honesty strengthens your ability to stand firmly without collapsing into guilt. The more you practice, the more natural it feels to speak your truth without over-explaining or apologizing. In the end, true strength lies in honoring yourself while still treating others with respect. You don't need to abandon compassion to protect yourself. You simply need to stop confusing endless niceness with resilience. Strength is quiet confidence, the ability to hold your boundaries, and the courage to prioritize what's healthy for you even when it's uncomfortable. It's the understanding that saying no does not make you unkind. It makes you strong enough to live authentically without being controlled by fear or manipulation. When you decide to protect yourself, it can feel uncomfortable at first because so much of society teaches that sacrifice equals goodness. You may have been conditioned to believe that putting others first, no matter the cost to yourself, makes you a better person. So when you finally draw a line or choose to step away from someone who is harming you, guilt often shows up quickly. It whispers that you're being selfish, heartless, or unkind. But the truth is, protecting your own well-being is not cruelty. It's an essential act of respect for yourself, and it's the only way to sustain a healthy life and healthy relationships. Cruelty is about intentionally causing harm. Self-preservation is about preventing harm from continuing. Those two are very different. For example, if someone repeatedly criticizes you in ways that make you feel small, choosing to limit your time with that person is not cruel. It's a recognition that your emotional health matters. Walking away from a toxic argument is not abandonment. It's a decision to stop subjecting yourself to verbal abuse. Setting boundaries and protecting your peace may disappoint others, especially those who are used to having unlimited access to your energy. But their disappointment is not evidence of your wrongdoing. It's evidence that the dynamic is shifting in a way that no longer benefits them at your expense. When you stop tolerating mistreatment, the people who benefited from your silence may accuse you of being cold or unfair. They may even try to paint you as the problem for daring to assert yourself. That's when you have to remember that preserving your well-being is not an attack, it's a defense. You're not trying to control or punish anyone. You're simply choosing not to allow behavior that erodes your sense of worth. This distinction matters because it frees you from internalizing blame when others resist your boundaries. Their discomfort doesn't mean you're wrong. It simply means they no longer have the unchecked access they once did. Another reason self-preservation gets mistaken for cruelty is because it requires saying no. Many people are uncomfortable with rejection, even small rejections. But every time you say no, you're really saying yes to something else. Your peace, your rest, your goals, your healing. That shift in perspective can help you release the guilt attached to protecting your time and energy. Saying, I can't take that on right now, or I'm not available for this is not a personal attack. It's an honest acknowledgement of your limits. And respecting your own limits is one of the most compassionate things you can do for yourself. It's also important to realize that self-preservation benefits not only you but also the people who truly care about you. When you are drained, resentful, and overextended, you can't show up fully for the relationships that actually matter. Protecting your energy allows you to invest it in places where it will be nurtured and reciprocated. In this way, self-preservation strengthens healthy connections while naturally weeding out the unhealthy ones. The relationships that survive your boundaries are the ones worth keeping because they thrive on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Practicing self-preservation also helps you rediscover your identity outside of toxic dynamics. When you stop giving away your emotional resources to those who misuse them, you gain space to focus on your own goals, values, and passions. This process of rebuilding may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've been defined by constant giving. But over time, you realize that choosing yourself doesn't diminish your compassion, it deepens it. You can extend kindness without losing yourself in the process. You can care for others without sacrificing your sanity. That balance is what makes your compassion sustainable. In the end, preserving your well-being is not about rejecting love, kindness, or generosity. It's about recognizing that you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot maintain healthy relationships if you are constantly running on empty. Protecting yourself is the foundation that allows you to live authentically and to give from a place of strength rather than depletion. That's not cruelty. It's the purest form of respect you can show yourself.